Hi everyone, and welcome to Great Games in Miami Football History. I'm your host, Frank Forte. Fasten your seatbelts and get ready as we take you through some of the most memorable moments in the history of University of Miami football. Our journey will span over 2 decades, perhaps the greatest 2 decades any one program has had in college football history. And it continues into a 3rd decade as we speak. Get ready to relive all the magic with the players, the coaches, and the broadcasters who have witnessed and been a part of all these amazing games played by the Hurricanes. We start with perhaps the most memorable game in the history of Miami football, the one that started it all. In 1983, the legendary Howard Schnellenberger entered his 5th season as UM head coach. Schnellenberger had transformed a program that hadn't been to a bowl game since 1967 back into a winning team. In 1980, the Canes beat Virginia Tech in the Peach Bowl. And just 3 years later came what many said was not possible, a chance to play for a national championship. However, the 1983 season didn't start off as planned. Miami dropped their season opener in Gainesville to the Gators. But then they reeled off 10 straight victories to get to the Orange Bowl. But even with a trip to the Orange Bowl, Miami was unsure of their fate heading into that final day. They would soon, however, find out.
January 2nd, 1984, Miami versus Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. The Hurricanes didn't know if they'd be able to win the national championship until that day.
The road to the national championship was paved by something that I can only explain as an act of God. We were ranked number 5 in the nation. They were number 1. Something bad had to happen to number 2, number 3, and number 4, and it did on that day.
On that day, number 2 Texas lost in the Cotton Bowl, while number 4 Illinois fell in the Rose. That opened the door for Miami to win its first national championship if they could hold off top-ranked, undefeated Nebraska.
Nobody in the stands thought Miami could win it. They might say, I hope Miami wins it. They couldn't beat the University of Florida in the opening game of the season. How are they going to beat, at that time, the best college football team in the history of America?
Their football team averaged more points than the Nebraska basketball team that year. And that was a tremendous Nebraska football team. Mike Rozier, Heisman Trophy winner, Turner Gill, a great quarterback for their style of play.
The only people that thought Miami was going to win that football game were those kids in that locker room.
Despite all of Nebraska's accolades and players, Howard Schnellenberger devised a game plan to counter that.
And our game plan from an offensive standpoint was brilliant. We were going to throw the ball on first down until we throw an incomplete pass.
The Canes jumped out to a 17-0 lead over a Nebraska team which was favored by 15 points. The scores came on 2 touchdown passes from freshman quarterback Bernie Kosar, both to tight end Glenn Dennison.
I got so disgusted with hearing how great they were and that we were just an afterthought. You know, in big games, I always came out real aggressive. And a lot of people, including my teammates, you know, were kind of worried, I think, as to how a young freshman quarterback was going to handle the spotlight, you know, of a national championship game.
And Nebraska was so befuddled on defense that I think what they tried to do is they started switching numbers, their jerseys, so that Miami couldn't pick up their blitz. They were changing numbers. And Kosar still figured it out. Wherever the blitz was coming from, Miami had it.
The Canes were seemingly in control of the game, but Nebraska was Nebraska for a reason and mounted a ferocious comeback. They countered with 17 unanswered points, including a touchdown on a play known simply as the Fumble-Rooski. The score was tied at 17 in the 3rd quarter.
Miami should have had a bigger lead, and Nebraska came storming back. And Mike Rozier twisted an ankle. So they go to Jeff Smith, and they ran, play that changed the game for them, they ran the Fumble-Rooski.
Miami answered back with a double punch of its own. The Canes were able to drive down the field, which resulted in 2 touchdown runs.
Kosar, Highsmith, dive, touchdown Miami. Bernie takes, gives, Bentley 5, 3, 2, touchdown Miami! Albert Bentley drilled his way through. Miami leads it 30-17.
Miami was ahead 31-17 in the 4th quarter. Nebraska wouldn't die though, despite Heisman Trophy winning tailback Mike Rozier going down with an ankle injury. His backup Jeff Smith answered the call, scoring a touchdown to bring Nebraska within 7, and then scoring on another run from 24 yards out on a 4th and 8 play.
But now Nebraska, they run an option play to Jeff Smith. And right before Turner Gill gets hit, he gets it to Smith on the corner and runs it in for a touchdown. And here we go, we had a tie game. And they're gonna go for 2.
Nebraska could have tied it with an extra point and probably still won the national championship, but head coach Tom Osborne wanted to be totally sure and went for a 2-point conversion for the win.
Dr. Osborne was a sportsman-like enough, coach-like enough to put winning the Orange Bowl game in front of what appeared to be a better chance to win the national championship by going for 2 rather than kicking the extra point.
They went for 2, try to win, which I commend Coach Osborne and his team. They played to win that game. They didn't play to tie it. There was no overtime then, so it would have been a tie if he kicks the extra point. Probably still might have won the national championship.
The Hurricanes were national champions for the first time in their history. Howard Schnellenberger had kept his promise of bringing a championship to South Florida. Final score, Miami 31, Nebraska 30, one of the most memorable games in Miami history, January 2nd, 1984.
Howard Schnellenberger would depart after the national championship season, lured away by professional football. He was replaced by Jimmy Johnson, who came over from Oklahoma State. In Johnson's second year, 1985, Miami headed into Norman, Oklahoma for a game against the third-ranked and heavily favored Sooners. For many, the lasting image of that game was quarterback Troy Aikman of Oklahoma breaking his leg after being sacked by Miami's Jerome Brown. The Canes would come away with the upset victory in that game, 27-14. The following year, Oklahoma would have their chance at revenge as the two teams met again. This time, however, it was in the Orange Bowl, and it involved the 2 best teams in the country.
September 27th, 1986, number 2 Miami versus number 1 Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl. It was another game involving Miami billed as the game of the century, and a rematch from the year before when Miami went into Norman and knocked off the Sooners 27-14.
And so Oklahoma comes rolling into the Orange Bowl, and the year before, Jerome Brown broke Troy Aikman's leg. So now Oklahoma's going to come into the Orange Bowl with Brian Bosworth.
They're going to drag me off this field because it's going to be war. I'm going to make sure that it's going to be 60 minutes of nothing but that. And containing Testaverde is our biggest concern, but intimidating and destroying is our primary goal.
The hype was certainly there for this one in the days preceding the game, but involving one guy in particular on Oklahoma.
The morning of the game, Melvin Bratton and Alonzo Highsmith, they call Oklahoma's hotel and they dial up Brian Bosworth. They get him in the hotel and they said, "Hey Boz, you better bring your helmet today because we're going to knock it off. You guys better come because we're going to kick your ass." They call him up in the hotel. This is before the game. Now the teams come out, toss of the coin, it's a stare down. This is a heavyweight fight. This is great theater. Bosworth's out there with the Oklahoma captains. Miami's out there, and they're not shaking hands. They're staring each other down. This was an all-out brawl.
The game was a defensive struggle to start. Miami held Oklahoma's wishbone attack at bay, while Brian Bosworth and the OU defense stifled Miami as the game headed into the second quarter as a scoreless tie.
And then on defense, Miami's defense anchored by Jerome Brown and George Meyer was in there, and Benny Blades, and they saw Oklahoma's wishbone game. It was a hard-hitting game.
In the second frame, though, the UM offense came alive. Vinny Testaverde led his team on an 8-play, 60-yard drive, capped off by an 8-yard touchdown pass to Alfredo Roberts. But the big play of that drive, and maybe the one which sticks out in people's minds as the play of the game, was the play which kept the drive alive.
Testaverde, again eludes a tackler. Scrambling back and still trying to make a gain.
every player that wins the Heisman has to have a signature play, and Vinny had his. He dropped back to throw, and he scrambled right and he scrambled left, and they grabbed his jersey and he stumbled, and I think his jersey came off his shoulder pad.
Was the run that Vinny Testaverde made that really, I think, probably did win him the Heisman Trophy. Phenomenal athletic move, great effort.
The run seemed to take any wind Oklahoma had in its sails out. The Sooners managed a field goal at the end of the second quarter to get within 7-3, but the third quarter was Miami's. Vinny Testaverde, who seemed in line for the Heisman Trophy, threw 3 touchdowns in that third frame. The first was to Michael Irvin. Then after UM forced a fumble on the ensuing kickoff, Testaverde found Charles Henry for a touchdown to make it 21-3. But it wasn't over. Vinny ended up completing 14 straight passes in the second and third quarter, a UM record, and found Michael Irvin for the second time.
They had talent, they had pride, they had character, and they had personality.
At 28-3, Oklahoma was buried too deep. Brian Bosworth did end up with double-digit tackles, but it was the Sooners who would never recover from this beating. They didn't win the national championship and found themselves in the big game the next year against the Canes, one they didn't want to remember either. Final score in this one, Miami 28, Oklahoma 16, a game to remember, September 27th, 1986.
That 86 season would end in heartbreak, however, as the Canes' quest for a second national championship fell short in the deserts of Arizona as the Hurricanes lost the Fiesta Bowl to Penn State. Many people believe that was the greatest team ever to set foot on the field at UM, despite the fact that they did not reach their ultimate goal. The 1987 team looked to finish what the 86 squad couldn't, as they ran the table during the regular season, including an amazing come-from-behind win at arch-rival Florida State. Their final task would be to beat Oklahoma for a third straight year as the two teams hooked up once again in the Orange Bowl.
January 1st, 1988, Miami versus Oklahoma for the national championship in the Orange Bowl. The previous year, Vinny Testaverde, Alonzo Highsmith, Michael Irvin, Melvin Bratton, and the rest of Miami had put together what some thought was the greatest team ever at UM, but they fell short in the Fiesta Bowl, losing to Penn State.
The 86 team was awesome. They had everything you needed. They had talent, they had pride, they had character, and they had personality.
I walked down that field and looked at the empty Fiesta Bowl and looked around, and I kind of made a vow to myself that if we get back in this position, we will not lose this game. And I kind of carried that vow throughout the season, knowing that every game was a building block to that national championship season and that national championship game.
Miami would have to go through top-ranked and heavily favored Oklahoma, who would be making its 4th straight appearance in the Orange Bowl. For head coach Jimmy Johnson, it would be a chance at revenge against his old nemesis, Barry Switzer.
And Switzer the whole week is playing the role of, I'm relaxed, we're Oklahoma, we don't have the pressure on us, we're ranked #1. It's Jimmy Johnson that's got to win.
Miami would have to rely on a last-minute substitute for star linebacker George Meimer Jr., who was suspended. The responsibility fell on the young Bernard Clark.
George Meimer Jr., the middle linebacker, was suspended for the game. And he was important because they were facing the option offense. Jameel Holloway was running the option for Oklahoma. And the middle linebacker was a big key in shutting down the option because he had to handle the fullback and also the quarterback. So Tiger Clark started the game for Miami.
The first half was even and mostly a defensive struggle. The two teams would trade touchdowns. Miami's on a 30-yard strike from Steve Walsh to Melvin Bratton, and Oklahoma's on a short 1-yard run. The score was tied at 7 heading to the second half.
Steve Walsh played the way he played all year. Didn't turn the ball over, threw the ball into the flats to Melvin Bratton. Bratton was on his way to one of the all-time great games and tore his knee up. He had 8 or 9 catches in the game.
The second half started with one of the most amazing plays in a UM bowl game. Place kicker Jeff Cox decided to give it a go from 56 yards away.
Here it is. Good! Oh my! 56 yards! Greg Cox kicked the field goal. and they're going to talk about this one for a while.
The field goal was the second longest in UM history and gave the Canes the lead. More big defensive plays gave Miami the ball and more chances to score. Steve Walsh and Michael Irvin capitalized later in the quarter when they hooked up for a 23-yard score.
Quick post pattern to Michael Irvin for a touchdown. It was a gigantic play. And when Walsh hit Irvin for that touchdown, I think Miami had the home field. You could really feel that Miami was going to win this game.
Catching the touchdown to seal the victory in the corner of the end zone in Orange Bowl, and then the fans pulling me up in the crowd. It's an experience I would never forget.
The Canes added a field goal in the fourth quarter, and with the way the defense was playing, this one seemed all but in the books for Miami. Jimmy Johnson and the Canes had finally done it. They had washed away the bad memories from the previous year and won UM's second national championship.
And the celebration that you saw Jimmy show after the game was really all of those emotions coming out.
Certainly Jimmy, and certainly the University of Miami, the community, everybody on that football team. It was important because we truly did feel like we had the best team.
Final score, Miami 20, Oklahoma 14. A game to remember, January 1st, 1988.
1988 would turn out to be Coach Jimmy Johnson's final year at the University of Miami. The Hurricanes would fall just short of a repeat national championship despite their 11-1 record. Impressive wins that season came over Florida State and Michigan in back-to-back weeks, but a controversial one-point loss in the middle of the year at Notre Dame precluded the Canes from sitting atop college football that year. 1989 came with much hope and promise under new head coach Dennis Erickson, and for the most part, Miami dominated their opponents during the regular season. One slip-up midway through the year against Florida State made the regular season finale in the Orange Bowl a must-win if the Hurricanes wanted any chance to play for a national championship.
November 25th, 1989, Miami versus top-ranked Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl. Entering this game, the question was whose streak would end that night. Would it be Miami's 32-game home winning streak, or would it be defending national champion Notre Dame's 23-game overall winning streak? A record crowd to date of over 81,000 packed the brims of the Orange Bowl to witness this historic battle.
Whether you believe it or not, I knew Miami was going to win that ball game 3 hours before it kicked off. That was a night game in the Orange Bowl. If you got out of your car 6 blocks away and you held up a match, it would have lit without striking it.
The Orange Bowl, the scene at the Orange Bowl was every bit as loud as it was when the Dolphins played the Chicago Bears on Monday night in 1986. Same kind of atmosphere.
There was much more at stake in this game than just the game itself. The series between these two teams was developing into a big rivalry. That night was a chance for the UM players to prove themselves to the country once again, and a chance to get revenge on a controversial one-point loss the year before to those Irish in South Bend.
Because Notre Dame thinks they're better than everybody else. The players act like they're better than everybody else. They act like they're better, they walk like they're better, they talk like they're better, but they weren't. They were never better than Miami. We're the other guys. They're supposedly living on the good side of the tracks and have the program that's got, Touchdown Jesus and the Golden Dome and the history and the Horsemen and Newt Rockme and this and that. Miami didn't care about that.
The Hurricanes undoubtedly got a lift from the energy the record crowd provided by going up 10-0. The key play on a 55-yard touchdown pass from Craig Erickson to Dale Dawkins.
The game was tight. Craig Erickson threw a touchdown pass to Dale Dawkins to get it going. But the crowd was just unbelievable all night long.
Notre Dame, though, showed why they were the #1 team in the country, responding with a field goal and then a 49-yard interception returned for a touchdown by linebacker Ned Bolkar. But UM's defensive leader, Tiger Clark, would give the Hurricanes another lift and came up big with an interception, returning it all the way to the 10-yard line.
The thing that stands out in my mind is I went to the sideline of Coach Tupperville at the time, who's the head coach at Auburn University. I told him what I was seeing on the field. And I said, Tubbs, I think if I jump the tight end, because I'm watching the quarterback, I'll be there for it. And he talked to Coach Lubick, who's the head coach at Colorado State now, and he said, okay, Tiger, go ahead and try it, but if it doesn't work, better go back to the game plan. And I saw it, and I tried it, and I jumped on it, and it gave us a chance to go up at halftime.
The play would lead to a Stephen McGuire touchdown just before the half to give UM a 17-10 lead going into the locker room. The third quarter may be the most memorable one ever played by a Canes team. Miami got the ball to start and held it for almost the entire frame, with one of the most memorable plays in school history taking place in that sequence.
The bravado that Miami had when they go for it on 3rd and 40 plus, and they complete it. That was it. The place went insane. And I will guarantee you that if you talk to Notre Dame people that came down to that game, they've never seen anything like it in their life, ever, anywhere, because I haven't.
And it seemed the entire stadium knew where that ball was going. It was going to Randall Hill on just a straight streak. And sure enough, Erickson got back there, flung it up, and on 3rd and 41, converted a 44-yard pass.
The amazing play and amazing drive was capped off by another touchdown pass from Craig Erickson to Dale Dawkins to make it 24-10. The drive, which lasted an incredible 11 minutes, kept the UM defense off the field and fresh for the remainder of the game. They were able to shut down Notre Dame with a relentless pursuit, which allowed the Canes to slay the Giant.
And from that point on, it was all Miami. Hurricanes were able to run the ball. Craig Erickson threw it successfully to Dale Dawkins and Randall Hill, and then Miami's defense. Their front four was unbelievable. Cortez Kennedy and Russell Maryland just took the game over and dominated.
I'm a guy that's been around this program for 25 years. I've been to most stadiums in the country following this program, been to national championships, and I'm telling you, there was nothing like that night in the Orange Bowl. Miami was going to win that football game come hell or high water.
Final score, Miami 27, Notre Dame 10. The game would propel the Hurricanes into the Sugar Bowl against Alabama, where they play for their 3rd national championship, making the win over the Irish that much bigger. It was a game to remember, November 25th, 1989.
After Miami's domination of Notre Dame, fans in South Florida were feeling another national championship. But it would be no easy task, as the Hurricanes had to go into enemy territory and play in the Sugar Bowl at the Louisiana Superdome against Alabama. The Crimson Tide fans did everything in their power to make it a home game for their team and ruin Miami's chances at a title. But the Canes responded in a big way.
January 1st, 1990. How appropriate it was for the University of Miami to close out the 80s in a national championship game, having won 2 already that decade.
There is no question that they feel whether they win or lose tonight, they should be the team of the decade, and why not? This is a team that won only 38% of its games in the 1970s, but 83% in the 1980s.
But the Canes didn't get to the national championship that year very easily. A loss to Florida State early in the season didn't bode well for the Hurricanes.
Miami lost to Florida State that year in Tallahassee on a Saturday night, where Chief Osceola came out and the Hurricane players tried to block his path. So I think they got a penalty for blocking the path of the horse.
Miami did rebound in the final game of that season. For the 7th straight year, the Hurricanes had beaten a number 1 ranked team. This time it was Notre Dame to get to the Sugar Bowl.
During that season, you were still making deals with bowls. You know, athletic directors were making deals with the bowls. So Miami had made a deal playing the Sugar Bowl sometime in early November.
But even heading into the Sugar Bowl, Miami didn't know if it would have a chance to win the national championship. They would need a Colorado loss in the Orange Bowl against Notre Dame to have a shot at winning everything. And in addition, they would have to beat a tough Alabama team close to its home turf in New Orleans.
Before the game, on New Year's Eve, there were just loads of Alabama fans everywhere. And wherever you turned on Bourbon Street, all you heard was, "Roll Tide, roll!" And this big contingent of Alabama fans came by and they yelled, "Roll Tide, roll!" And the Miami players said, "Roll your ass down the street, blankety blank. We're going to beat you tomorrow."
Miami came out early in the game and made a statement on Stephen McGuire's 3-yard touchdown run. The Canes were up 7-0, the lead they would hold until the end of that first frame. The second quarter was different, though, for the Canes, as Alabama came out with blazing guns. They were able to put up 17 points on a top-rated Miami defense, which led up an average of just 9 points a game that season.
Cortez Kennedy, monsters like that on defense. Shane Curry, Darrell Williams, special teams-wise, Michael Barrow, Darren Smith, Jesse Armstead, Kevin Williams, guys that could truly swarm, that epitomize the term swarm.
Alabama scored 17 points in the second quarter, so it was a tight game at the half.
In that second quarter, Miami still put up a touchdown and a couple of Carlos Huerta field goals and took a 20-17 lead into the halftime locker room.
Alabama kept the game close because of their offense, but Miami's offense, Craig Erickson had a hot hand, but Alabama kept it just close enough.
The second half was a much different story on defense for Miami. They were able to hold Alabama and put forth a couple of scoring charges. The first came on a Craig Erickson 11-yard touchdown pass to tight end Rob Chudzinski in the third frame. The extra point was missed and the Canes held a 26-17 lead.
Notre Dame beat Colorado in the Orange Bowl, so Miami was celebrating. That kind of knocked Colorado out. And Miami had beaten Notre Dame previously, so Miami was going to win the national championship.
In the fourth, Alabama started pressing, but the UM defense came up big again with a Charles Farms interception. That set the stage for the drive of the game. Erickson again rallied his team down the field 88 yards and capped it off with a 12-yard touchdown pass.
And it's caught for a touchdown, Randy Bethel.
The man Dennis Erickson said is the best athlete I've ever had at the tight end position.
Alabama kind of crept back into it, but the entire way, we truly kind of had a good hold, a good stranglehold at them and got it done.
The game was sealed, and the national championship was sealed for the University of Miami for the third time. The Canes would be known as the team of the 80s, capturing their third national championship in 7 years. Final score, Miami 33, Alabama 25. A game to remember, January 1st, 1990.
Miami was truly the team of the 80s, winning 3 national championships in a 6-year span and coming close to winning a couple more. UM football was soon becoming a storied tradition, which is exactly what Howard Schnellenberger had envisioned. It would be up to Dennis Erickson's team to keep that tradition alive in the 90s. The 1990 season was capped off with Miami's 10th win of the year in the Cotton Bowl as they blew out Texas 46-3. In 1991, the Canes were members of a conference for the first time ever, calling the Big East their new home. And Miami was a clear-cut favorite to win the conference before the season, behind Heisman Trophy hopeful quarterback Gino Torretta. Miami dominated its opponents over the first 8 games of that season, winning all but one by double digits. But then came the Florida State game in Tallahassee, and it would be one for the ages.
November 16th, 1991. Billed as the game of the year, the second-ranked Miami Hurricanes played top-ranked Florida State in Tallahassee before the largest crowd to date at Doak Campbell Stadium.
Prior to that game on Monday Night Football, Casey Weldon was on at halftime. And I just so happened to be in a local South Miami establishment with Gino Torretta. And Casey Weldon was on TV talking about how tight this game was going to be and how important it was to Florida State. And Gino was very calm and cool, and I thought, we got him right where we want him.
The fans as well as the players knew this game would likely determine the national champion in college football that season. Miami had history on its side, though, entering the contest, having won 7 straight games against number 1 ranked teams.
Florida State was ranked number 1 all year long. But as the season was unfolding, and this game was in November, as the season was unfolding, I think the pressure started to mount on Florida State, and they started to flatten out a little bit.
The Hurricanes wasted no time getting into the scoring column. Miami marked 74 yards on the opening drive for a touchdown, capped by Stephen Maguire's 2-yard run into the end zone. However, that would be the only time the Canes scored before the fourth quarter.
The biggest thing I think that happened to us is that they were bringing all kinds of pressure. They were flogging the A-gaps real well. We weren't getting it protected. They were penetrating, they were in the backfield, they were getting us to tackles for losses, got a couple sacks, and it took us a little while to figure it out and get it done.
3 first-half turnovers by UM allowed the Seminoles to take a 10-7 lead into the second half. and the score held at 16-7 at the end of 3 quarters, leading into one of the most famous fourth quarters in the history of this rivalry. Carlos Huerta knocked through a 45-yard field goal to cut the Miami deficit to a touchdown with just under 10 minutes left to go. And later in the quarter, as if on cue, the Hurricanes marched 58 yards for their second touchdown of the game, a 1-yard run by Larry Jones with just over 3 minutes remaining. But the signature play of the drive was the one which kept it going on 4th down and 6.
Pass is caught. Pass is good for a first down and goal to go at the 3-yard line to Horace Copeland.
4th and 6. 4th and 6 up to the line of scrimmage. Gino Torretta barking out, he's huddled, bent over the center, and he's trying to call out the signals and trying to call out the cadence, and no one can hear a thing. So if you look at it on TV, you watch the camera shot, the angles will show every single lineman is looking at the football. No one can hear what's going on, and every single guy was laid off their snap count. But what did happen, we did get some protection. He hits Horace Copeland, and Horace Copeland did have the first down. And I remember their DB just trying to get a hold of his leg and wrench him back behind the sticks so Florida State could take the ball back, but they couldn't.
In the second half, Dennis Erickson went to the running game, and Stephen McGuire took over. And Stephen McGuire single-handedly got Miami back into that game by running the football. Florida State had Miami. It was 4th down and 7. They had Miami. They get off the field, they win the game. And Gino Torretta nails Horace Copeland for a first down right in front of Terrell Buckley.
The Seminoles would come right back, moving the ball all the way to the Miami 17-yard line in the closing seconds. And then came the first in a series of infamous field goal attempts by Florida State in this storied rivalry.
I actually walked all the way to the far end and kind of took a knee, and I was looking at that thing because everybody was exhausted. Everyone had played their hearts out, offense and defense, and I remember looking at the angle and going, this isn't exactly an easy angle.
This could be for a national championship. It's up. Missed it to the right.
It goes up, and I could see it was no good because the fans in the end zone were the Miami fans. That's where they had the Hurricane fans. And that's the only way you could tell is the ball was lost in a sea of green and orange. And
I just could never forget the look on Coach Bowden's face when he ran on the field thinking it was good, but it wasn't. And we go on to win the national title, but woof. How do you forget about that one, man? That one's.
But Bobby Bowden, he thought it was good. He thought the kick was good. And he ran out on the field and he turned to his assistants and said, it was good, it was good. And someone had to tell him, no, it was wide right.
I don't know if it's divine intervention. I think, it's always just, there's no such thing as luck. It's preparation meets opportunity, and I think we prepared hard for those games, and when we had opportunities to make plays, I think we made it.
Final score, Miami 17, Florida State 16. Dennis Erickson and the Canes would go on to win their final 2 regular season games before playing in the Orange Bowl for their 4th national championship against Nebraska. A game to remember, November 16th, 1991.
The win over Florida State propelled Miami to another undefeated regular season and yet another appearance in the Orange Bowl Classic. The Nebraska Cornhuskers stood between the Canes and their 4th national championship in 8 years.
January 1st, 1992, Miami versus Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. Miami hadn't been ranked number 1 on New Year's Day in any of their first 3 national championships, but the top-ranked Hurricanes had dominated that season, looking to keep their perfect record intact against Nebraska.
And Miami was tied with Washington, but there was a lot of momentum for Washington. They were loaded that year. They had Steve Ettman on defense, so there was this thought that Miami had to play a great game.
We had a very young team. We didn't have, I think we only had 1 or 2 seniors on the squad that year, so we weren't expected to compete or even win the national championship.
The Cornhuskers were the top rushing team in the nation that season heading into the Orange Bowl, tearing up opposing teams for an average of 353 yards a game.
Tough Nebraska team, real big, a typical, big Nebraska team that was physical as can be, but just could not hang with the speed that we had.
But Miami's defense came up big in the first quarter, which would be a sign of things to come. The Canes allowed just 1 total yard of offense for the entire first frame.
Defense stuffed everything they did. It seemed that every time we came to the sideline to talk about making an adjustment, you could hear the coach, I think it was Coach Arnold, yelling, "Punt team, punt, 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 block." And sure enough, we were back on the field just like that.
Meanwhile, UM's offense put a charge against the Nebraska defense. Heisman Trophy winner Gino Torretta marched his team down the field with ease and began the scoring with an 8-yard touchdown pass to Kevin Williams to give UM a 7-0 lead. Miami would add 2 Carlos Huerta field goals and was in control, leading 13-0 after 1 frame.
But the story of this game was Miami's defense. They just completely overwhelmed Nebraska's offense. Nebraska couldn't move the ball. I think they had 1 yard of total offense in the first quarter. They had 68 yards rushing in the game, 48 yards of total offense at halftime. Miami made Nebraska's offense look completely inept.
The second quarter was relatively uneventful as the two teams traded possessions, but the UM defense was relentless, allowing Nebraska to gain virtually no yards for the entire half.
Nebraska could not move the ball, whereas Miami moved the ball at will, but they kept shooting themselves in the foot and had to settle for 3 field goals in the game by Carlos Huerta that made the score look not as bad as what it should have been.
The momentum was clearly on UM's side the whole way, and that wouldn't change in the second half. Third-string tailback Larry Jones, relatively unknown to many, came in to provide an offensive spark.
Stephen McGuire was injured against Boston College. He blew his knee out in the last game of the year. So Miami had Larry Jones, a freshman, at running back.
Jones would run for 144 yards, including a touchdown in the third quarter to break this game open. He would eventually win the Orange Bowl MVP. The Canes had a 19-0 lead in the third quarter. The way their defense was playing, this game seemed all but finished.
Running back hurt. Steve McGuire was out for the season injured leg at Boston College. I remember the backup tailback, Donald Bennett, was out as well. Okay, let's go to the third-team tailback. All right, third-team tailback, let's rush for 167 yards and let's become the Orange Bowl MVP.
Carlos Huerta added a long 54-yard field goal to end the third quarter, and Miami held a 22-0 lead. The only question was, would Miami be able to keep Nebraska scoreless? The Huskers hadn't been shut out since 1973, but that was about to change, as Miami's defensive pursuit was a constant the whole way.
Nebraska, they could still be running the football today and would not move the ball a yard.
Nebraska was held to just 83 yards rushing on the day, and the victory was sealed for Miami. The Canes had now won 45 straight games in the Orange Bowl and would be crowned national champion for the 4th time in 9 years.
And you always think of, man, you know, when you win it, is it just exuberance? Is it just a celebration? And truly, all I could remember was going to my hotel room and sitting at the edge of the bed and waiting for the news to come on and waiting for them to finally announce CNN and the USA Today and the split polls and finally say, okay, yeah, Miami is a national title, and just seeing that, looking at it, and just laying back in bed and falling asleep.
It was the first streak of its kind since Notre Dame had won 4 national championships in that same span back in the 1940s. Final score, Miami 22, Nebraska nothing. A game to remember, Miami's 4th national championship, January 1st, 1992.
In 1991, Miami and Florida State played perhaps their most memorable game to date, with the Canes winning after a missed field goal. We know what it all was, wide right by the Seminoles. In 92, the scene shifted back to the Orange Bowl. Even though it wasn't number 1 versus number 2 like the previous year, it was almost as good. That year, it would be number 2 Miami against third-ranked Florida State, with Miami's 20-game home winning streak on the line.
October 3rd, 1992, Miami versus Florida State in the Orange Bowl. Every player and fan involved in this rivalry remembers FSU's field goal attempt the previous year to win the game sail wide right. This year was another battle of top 5 teams, with Miami coming in at number 2 and Florida State ranked 3rd. The Seminoles came out and were determined to make Miami pay for their miscue from the year before.
Look out! One man. He's gone.
The start. Are you kidding me? The start. Tamrick Vanover goes 94 yards for a touchdown on the opening kickoff. 7-0.
Miami, though, weathered the early storm from Florida State by not allowing any more points in the first quarter. The Canes didn't get on the board either, but took control in the second frame. First, a 24-yard field goal by Dane Pruitt to get on the board, and later it was Gino Torretta going down the field and hitting Coleman Bell with a 29-yard touchdown pass. The Canes were in the lead now, 10-7, but not for long as FSU tied it up just before the half with a Dan Mowry field goal.
There's more blood and sweat on that Saturday than any other school and any other rivalry in the nation. And if you watch the ratings of all the great football games, and I bet you University of Miami and Florida State go down by far being one of the best rivalries in college football.
In the second half, the two defenses came ready to play, getting stops left and right, but it was the FSU offense which was able to forge ahead slightly in the third, getting a field goal opportunity and making it 13-10 heading into the final 15 minutes.
So once again, Florida State has Miami in the trap. They've got him again. They've had the kickoff return for a touchdown. They have the lead, and Mickey Andrews says, we're going to keep coming after you.
FSU again came through with a field goal early in the fourth to make it 16-10. With just 9 minutes remaining, the Canes would need to hold FSU the rest of the way and get a touchdown of their own. Gino Torretta showed why he was a prime candidate for the Heisman Trophy that year.
Mickey Andrews continues to unleash the blitz. And they snap the ball to Gino Torretta. He gets hit. I'm not sure that he ever sees the result of the play, but he lofts it down the field. One-on-one. Lamar Thomas and Clifton Abraham. And Lamar Thomas just slips right over the top of Clifton Abraham and scoots into the end zone for the game-winning touchdown. That was a beautiful throw. It was just a heavenly pass by Torretta.
The 33-yard pass gave UM the lead, and from there the Miami defense and special teams took over and pounded FSU literally.
Florida State wide receiver had come across the middle, and Michael Barrow just unloaded on him. One of the biggest hits ever in college football.
The Canes then forced a safety against the Noles to go up by 3. FSU did manage to get the ball back one last time and put itself in a position to tie the game with a guy who had already knocked home 3 field goals that day.
Mowry hit it, long enough. He missed it to the right.
And this time it's Dan Mowry for the field goal. This one was a little bit farther. This was not a chip shot, and this one was going into the open end zone at the Orange Bowl. And so he misses. So you got wide right 1 and wide right 2.
That was just a field goal to tie. If they would have made it, we would have probably just ended up playing them in a bowl game for the national championship. So the second one was just for a tie.
They just can't do it. I was there at the game, and hey, stuff happens. But to keep happening over and over and over again, I don't know. Maybe one of our players has a voodoo doll or something. Maybe the old Sebastian has a voodoo doll or something with Florida State.
I definitely think they're jinxed, and I definitely believe they're thinking about it. They've had good kickers, but they get against Miami and they can't get over that mental block of missing kicks wide right or wide left or what have you. They need to develop a new field goal post for Florida State when they play Miami, I guess.
Final score, Miami 19, Florida State 16. Wide right for the second year in a row. A phrase that's as common as anything around UM football today. Wide right 2. Certainly a game to remember, October 3rd, 1992.
Certainly Miami endured some tough times off the field in the mid-90s. And 1998 wasn't the best season the Canes ever had on the field either. Heading into the final regular season game against undefeated UCLA, Miami had 3 losses to date, including a painful and humbling defeat the week before at Syracuse. But head coach Butch Davis and the Canes would try to prove they were still a national powerhouse on a December afternoon in the Orange Bowl.
December 5th, 1998, Miami versus UCLA in the Orange Bowl. Just 1 week earlier, the Hurricanes had been blown out of Syracuse's Carrier Dome 66-13, the most number of points UM had ever lost by.
We had had a disastrous game in Syracuse. Very fine Syracuse team, Donovan McNabb, and probably one of the best teams they've had there. And you know, they were just so dominant. We played so poorly in the Dome at Syracuse.
The schedule didn't get any easier as third-ranked undefeated UCLA was next on Miami's schedule to close out the regular season. It was a game that had been rescheduled because of a hurricane.
You know, their season's over. They weren't real hyped up about coming and playing Miami. And, you know, every time you turned around, it was, well, you know, we'll do what we have to do and blah, 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 blah on UCLA's side. But UCLA caught Miami on a bad day.
UCLA comes in. If they win the game, they go to the national championship game. All the people were there from the Fiesta Bowl. That was the national championship game site.
I don't think a lot of people really felt like that we would win the football game, but I knew that if we played well and we put the Syracuse game behind us, I knew we could have a great game out of our players.
The only problem 10-0 UCLA had that season was its defense. The Bruins came in undefeated, but their defense allowed 25 points a game.
You know, the joke was that UCLA defense is dressed in baby blue for a reason. And you could run on them, you could do whatever you wanted to do with them, but the offense was golden.
Miami took advantage of that and built a small halftime lead of 21-17 behind junior Edgerrin James, who had 175 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns all in the first half.
I was so impressed with how Coach Coker called that game, where he trusted his offensive line, he trusted his play calling, and he trusted Edgerrin James to carry the University of Miami to victory.
The most exciting game was that UCLA game because we were underdogs. We had gotten beat the previous week. We had gotten beat bad, and then we come out UCLA game. We get a couple of guys suspended, so it looks like they're just gonna run all over us.
UCLA came out in the third quarter determined not to let their opportunity for a national championship slip away. They steamrolled the Canes much like Syracuse the previous week and took a 38-21 lead late in the third quarter.
We had to win this football game. We were ahead at half by a close margin. We got down 17 points in the third quarter.
The Canes, though, pulled to within 38-28 in the fourth when Scott Covington hit Santana Moss for a 71-yard touchdown pass.
Scott Covington, what a game for him. Coming from California, UCLA, grew up right in their backyard, and to come here, the University of Miami.
The Canes seemed determined to come back, but UCLA kept throwing punches, going up 45-35 before Miami made one final charge. Covington completed a 29-yard touchdown pass before the Canes recovered a UCLA fumble. Covington, Edgerrin James and company had one last drive to try and pull this one out.
The one thing before Scott went on the field that we talked about, he said, just go in the huddle, play with poise, play with confidence. We got plenty of time. Don't get caught up in the emotion that sometimes can derail, you know, those kinds of drives.
Covington looked like an All-American, marching the Canes down the field with passes to Andre King and Nick Williams. The ball was all the way down to the 1-yard line before the game-winning score. Still UCLA and quarterback Cade McNown, who torched UM that day for a school record 515 yards passing and 5 touchdowns, couldn't thread the needle on the final play.
And how about it? Miami's won! Miami's won! The Canes have done it! 49-45! They've upset UCLA! They have ruined the Bruins season! The 20-game win streak is over!
That game validated to the nation, not just Hurricane fans, but to the nation, that the Miami program is back.
That was a fun game to play in. You know, it seemed like we won a national championship, but you know, we kind of prevented them from going to a BCS. But it was fun, and that might have been the greatest game I ever played in.
UCLA never, ever recovered from that loss. Bob Toledo, the coach, ends up losing his job. They go through 3 or 4 defensive coordinators before Toledo gets replaced, and they never recovered.
Final score, Miami 49, UCLA 45. Running back Edgerrin James finished with a school rushing record that still stands today, 39 carries for 299 yards and 3 touchdowns. Certainly a game to remember, December 5th, 1998.
When you never give up on each other, when you don't give up on the guys in this room, and you hang together, stay together, play together, you can accomplish anything. Guys, I am so proud. This was a win. This was a win by the entire team fighting their guts out. This was a Hurricane win. Congratulations!
By the turn of the century, the University of Miami-Florida State rivalry was one-sided in FSU's favor. The Seminoles had beaten the Canes 5 times in a row, including a 47-0 win in 1997 in Tallahassee. But in 2000, the Canes seemed to have things rolling. They had just one slip-up early in a road contest at Washington, but they were playing great football. They would try to play great again on a hot Saturday afternoon in the Orange Bowl against their arch rival.
October 7th, 2000, Miami versus number 1 Florida State in the Orange Bowl.
We can't stand, they can't stand us, and when you get ready to play them, you get up for that week. I mean, you get so many phone calls, guys.
I really characterize the Florida State Miami games. They're not NFL games, but they're not college games either. They're somewhere in the middle, that level of competition. And we have talent, and you look across the field, and they have the same type talent on their sidelines.
In the late 90s, the Miami-Florida State rivalry wasn't what it once was and wasn't what it is today.
It was only 3 years prior, 1997, Miami, while on probation, with 60 scholarships, basically a third of a team, with walk-ons and anybody that they can get to come on and participate, they go to Doak Campbell Stadium and they get slaughtered, 47-0.
I just remember Butch Davis making it very clear to the staff that it was made known that Florida State had kind of lost their respect a little bit for Miami, that it was no longer a rivalry. They had won their 5 straight.
The top-ranked Seminoles were coming off a national championship and had a nation-leading 17-game winning streak heading into that hot October day in the Orange Bowl.
That game was a 12 noon kickoff. It's probably the hottest day that's ever occurred in the history of the Orange Bowl. Unbelievably hot. Actually ran out of fluids in the Orange Bowl.
The game began with the Canes shocking the Seminoles. Even though FSU got the ball deep in UM territory 2 times early, the Canes defense came up with 4th down stops each time. After the first stop, Ken Dorsey found Najee Davenport for a 20-yard touchdown pass for the game's first score. Later in the quarter, after the Hurricanes' second stop on 4th down, Miami began a 10-play, 87-yard drive, which was capped off by another touchdown, this time a 1-yard run by DJ Williams to make it 14-0. Before the half, Todd Severs increased the lead with a 31-yard field goal to go up 17-0 at halftime.
You know, the night before the game, me and Andre Johnson were roommates, and I told him, don't be surprised if we go up 14-0 at half. And he looked at me like, you know, whatever. And at halftime, it was 17-0, and he looked at me like, man, what you knew? I said, I just felt it.
Miami, though, wouldn't continue to pitch a shutout in the second half as Florida State finally came to life. Chris Wenke took to the air and found Anquan Bolden for a 48-yard touchdown pass. The Noles were within a touchdown at 17-10 in this physically grueling game. UM was up 20-10 heading into the fourth quarter, but for much of the final frame it was a defensive struggle, and it appeared as if the Canes seemed destined for victory. But FSU mustered up some offense with just a few minutes to go as Wenke connected with Bolden again to cap off a drive and make it 20-17. As Miami looked to run out the clock on the ensuing drive, disaster struck.
We actually had the game won. We had a 3rd down and 4 late in the fourth quarter. We threw a short angle pass to Najee Davenport, made the first down. He falls down after the first down. If he had done that, the game would have been over, but he makes the run. He gets the ball stripped.
The Noles scored in what seemed like no time at all as Wenke hit Atrus Bell for a 29-yard touchdown pass. The Noles had the lead, but there was still time left for Ken Dorsey and the Canes to mount the drive.
Everybody in the Orange Bowl knows Miami's getting the ball back. Miami's got just enough time to win the ball game. The place is going crazy. Everybody's on their feet. You can't hear yourself talk. You can't move. The old Orange Bowl is just rattling. It's at its best.
Dorsey took over at his own 32, completing 6 of 7 passes, including 2 to Santana Moss and 1 to Reggie Wayne. The final pass would be from 13 yards out and one of the lasting images in Hurricane football lore.
Touchdown Hurricanes! Jeremy Shockey! The Canes take the lead! The Canes take the lead over Florida State! 46 seconds left! A 13-yard touchdown pass from Dorsey to Shockey!
The play was actually designed for Santana Moss coming underneath. And but the linebacker dropped on Santana, and Kenny did a great job and hit Jeremy Shockey for the touchdown to win the football game. And they came back and had a long field goal attempt to possibly win the game. I believe the attempt ended up wide right.
Snap is down. Munyon's kick is on the way. And it's no good. It's wide right. It's wide right. The Canes win. The Canes beat Florida State 27-24.
Some kind of way the ball started coming to the playmakers, and me, Reggie, Shockey, all of us started making catches and got to that last catch. When Shockey caught that ball, man, it was nothing I think that they can do after that to tell me that we wasn't going to win that game, and the game was over, man. We was champions.
Miami football had something to prove heading into the 2001 season. Many felt the Canes had deserved to play for the national championship the year before. Instead, their arch-rival Florida State got the nod, despite a UM victory over Florida State in that season. In 2001, the Canes found themselves with a new coach yet again. Butch Davis was off to the NFL, and offensive coordinator Larry Coker would carry on. Under their first-year coach, Miami rolled off 7 straight wins to start the season, including a 22-point thumping over FSU in Tallahassee. Then on a chilly November afternoon, Miami went on the road to Boston College and tried to keep the undefeated season intact.
November 10th, 2001, Miami versus Boston College. The Miami-Boston College matchup in Chestnut Hill has always had a flair for the dramatic. It was no different during Miami's national championship run in 2001.
Boston College, for whatever reason, is always a problem for Miami up there. And on this particular day, Boston College kept Miami off balance.
The number 1 ranked Hurricanes had to overcome a tough road environment and a career-high 4 interceptions thrown by quarterback Ken Dorsey.
Series after series after series, you think this is it when they get control of the game. This is it. And interception after interception after interception is one of Dorsey's, if not his worst game.
Miami was so bad on offense, it was the only game that season where the Hurricanes didn't have an offensive touchdown. 4 Todd Severs field goals actually kept the Hurricanes alive in the game, and they had a 12-7 lead late in the fourth quarter. But with just a couple of minutes left, BC was determined to upset the number 1 team in the country as they lined up for one final drive.
Now they start chipping away on this drive. And they make a first down, and they make a first down. And St. Pierre, the quarterback, is hot. And the fans are in it. They smell upset.
The crowd at BC is fired up. They have a chance to upset Miami.
You could see their sideline, they were in it. And I think we all felt like, oh, they better score fast. We're not going to get the ball back. They're going right down the field. They're milking the clock. It'd be better if they just go ahead and score so Miami could get the ball back.
Some of the Boston College fans have told me since, they're sitting in the stands, and as that drive is progressing, they're on the 9-yard line or 7 or 11, whatever it is, they're saying, hey, we're going to win this game.
And just when Miami's hopes of an undefeated season and the national championship seemed in limbo, one of the most miraculous plays in UM history unfolded in the combination of Mike Rumph, Matt Walters, and Ed Reed.
Walters, it bounced on Mike Rumph, and it's still loose, and Edward Reed is going to score, I think. He's being chased by Knight. Ed Reed is going to go to the end zone. I don't believe what I saw.
I'm saying get down, get down, get down as Ed Reed takes the ball from Matt Walters, and just an unbelievable play. It's one of those no, 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 and go, go, go.
I was on that side of the field when that play happened, and it hits a thigh pad, it bounces into a defensive lineman's hands, and he starts running down the field, and Ed Reed, who was labeled that year the playmaker, and deservedly so, made a play.
All of the chain reaction occurs, and Ed Reed gets the ball from Matt Walters and just literally rips it out of his hands, and where he's off the races. Nobody was going to catch Ed Reed. They tried.
That was an exasperating game, and when they made that play, I think I nearly fainted.
The touchdown sealed it for Miami as the Hurricanes improved to 8-0 on the season. Final score, Miami 18, Boston College 7. A game to remember, November 10th, 2001.
After the dramatic Boston College victory, Miami still had work to do. Easy wins against Syracuse and Washington in the Orange Bowl got Miami to the regular season finale still undefeated. Standing in the way of that year's national championship game at the Rose Bowl would be Virginia Tech, and their hostile crowd at Lane Stadium in Blacksburg.
December 1st, 2001, undefeated Miami seemed destined for its 5th national championship that season, heading into its final game against number 14 Virginia Tech. But playing in Blacksburg and against the Hokies has never been a picnic for the Canes.
That game to me was in doubt before we left Miami. You go to Virginia Tech, and it's like preaching to the choir when you talk about Virginia Tech. But they beat Miami 7 out of the last 10 times they've played them. Virginia Tech, when you have them in the Orange Bowl, is a tough game. When you go to Blacksburg, I've never been to a tougher place to win a ball game for Miami. Never.
There was an immense amount of pressure on the University of Miami. Undefeated, playing in December, one of the last games of the year. College football is basically over.
The Hokies had dropped 2 games that season, but looked to play spoiler. Early on, the Canes fumbled on their first possession and had a field goal blocked. Tech capitalized with a field goal of its own to take a 3-0 lead, but the Canes would respond.
Miami went up there and fought tooth and nail the entire ball game.
Miami was able to score a touchdown first on a pass from Ken Dorsey to Jeremy Shockey, and then the Hurricanes took advantage of their last 3 possessions of the first half. Touchdowns by Clinton Portis and a couple of field goals by Todd Severs gave UM a commanding 20-3 halftime lead. But the game was nowhere near over, as Virginia Tech was determined to defend its home field.
They got off to a great start, made it look easy, had the lead at the half, and but it doesn't take Virginia Tech much to get back into the game.
In the second half, Kenny Dorsey had an ankle injury, and we had several players. Bryant McKinney was out for the game, our left tackle. So some of our top players were really injured in the second half.
The Hokies held the ball for over 8 minutes in the third quarter and gained over 100 yards. Their only touchdown of the third frame came on a 1-yard run. The lead was cut to 20-10. Miami responded with a field goal to extend the lead to 2 touchdowns. Heading into the fourth, Miami sat comfortably on a 23-10 lead. After tacking on another field goal early on in the fourth, Miami had all but packed their bags for Pasadena, leading 26-10.
We have a 16-point lead. They need to score twice and make two-point conversions. And golly, don't they almost come close.
They block a punt, pick it up and return it for a touchdown. Now the Hokie fans are going crazy.
And they block the punt. And Tech might score. They will.
Got the representatives of the Rose Bowl sitting there with big piles of roses to give the president, to invite us to go to the Rose Bowl in the locker room, and we've got to hang on so that the roses don't wind up in the trash cans.
Near side, here's the throw, and it's caught for a 2-point. No! He dropped it. Holy cow.
They throw a fade pass to Ernest Wilford, who has the size advantage, and he drops it. 2-point conversion, he drops it in the corner of the end zone.
Let's be honest. They lost because a Virginia Tech player got hit between the numbers with the football on a perfect pass, and he dropped it.
Even though the conversion was no good, there was still time left for Tech. Clinton Portis made sure the seconds ticked off with his runs, and the game was sealed.
We have what we call our 4-minute offense, where we're really not particularly trying to score. We're just trying to make first down, stay in bounds, protect the football, and run the clock out. We're going to win the game if we run the clock out.
And they just kept feeding it to Clinton Portis play after play, whether it was their stretch play on the ground or throwing him a pass on third down. He converted some big plays. Virginia Tech had one last shot at it, and Grant Knoll was the quarterback, and Ed Reed kind of baited him to make a bad throw. He threw it down the middle. He thought he had his man open, but Ed was way too smart for that, and he stepped in and made the big interception, and that pretty much sealed the coffin on Virginia Tech. But man, was that a wrangle fest.
The undefeated season continued for Miami, and a trip to the Rose Bowl was sealed. Final score, Miami 26, Virginia Tech 24. A game to remember, December 1st, 2001.
Miami's magical undefeated trip would continue out to the Rose Bowl. The Hurricanes would have a rematch with the program it beat 10 years earlier to win their last national championship. That would be the Nebraska Cornhuskers. The Hurricanes would go for their 5th title in less than a 2-decade span out in Southern California.
January 3rd, 2002, Miami versus Nebraska for the national championship in the Rose Bowl. The Hurricanes looked to complete their season of perfection and win their 5th title as they took on a Nebraska team many thought should not have been playing for the national championship. In their last regular season game, the Huskers got demolished at Colorado 62-36, but the BCS computers put them in the Rose Bowl anyway as a huge underdog against Miami.
I had no doubt whatsoever that the University of Miami was going to win. They were going to positively win that game. There's no way that they would not win that football game.
Think of the players on that team. Dorsey, McGahee, Davenport, Shockey, Ed Reed, Bryant McKinney, Vilma, DJ Williams, Mike Rumpf, Joaquin Gonzalez, Martin Bibla. It goes on and on. There was a star at every position.
As far as quality depth goes and as far as future NFL picks, I don't think that you can field a better team than that one.
UM showed its superiority about midway through the first frame. After DJ Williams forced a fumble that was recovered by William Joseph, Ken Dorsey went to the air on first down and found Andre Johnson.
And immediately the Canes will try to strike deep as they go down the middle, and it is touchdown! Andre Johnson was all by himself.
He was the most physically dominating receiver that I had seen in college football the last 5 years. He came off the line of scrimmage, and they were in some press coverage. They were backed off a little bit, and he swatted the cornerback and knocked him to his knees.
Andre's so big, fast, and physical that he was able to overpower the cornerback, smaller cornerback, and Kenny made a great throw. And
Miami forced another turnover on the ensuing kickoff, but still held a 7-0 lead after the first quarter. But that's when the Canes turned on the burners. First, Clinton Portis dominated the way he did all season with a 39-yard touchdown run. Then Nebraska QB and Heisman Trophy winner Eric Crouch threw an interception run back 47 yards by James Lewis to give UM a 21-0 lead.
Intercepted, went right through the hands of the receiver, and it's touchdown Miami, James Lewis.
After a Nebraska punt, the Hurricanes wasted no time scoring their next touchdown. It took just 2 plays, a 45-yard pass to Andre Johnson and then a 21-yard pass to Jeremy Shockey to make it 27-0.
All of a sudden, Andre Johnson's going in for a touchdown, and the next thing you know, we're intercepting a pass and taking it in, and then Willis McGahee has a great run, and all of a sudden we're way up in the game.
Miami got the ball back one last time before the half and started to put a cherry on top of their sundae with another touchdown pass, again to Andre Johnson for 8 yards and a 34-0 lead, which UM would carry into the halftime locker room.
That game wasn't close right from the kickoff. Dorsey to Andre Johnson, Clinton Portis, he runs a little counter play. He was always looking for a big play, splits the defense, goes for a touchdown. And in that game, Willis McGahee was the fullback because Nijay Davenport was hurt. Miami was very unselfish. They lined up Shockey in the backfield.
We just played a complete game that night. My impression was we played a complete game offensively and defensively. And it was truly probably one of our best games in the national championship game in terms of the total domination.
It was all academic from this point. Nebraska put forth a couple of meaningless touchdowns to make the score look a little more respectable, but there was no doubt about the outcome of this one.
So in one way, you're celebrating in the broadcast with 34-0, high fives, woohoo! But then we got a long second half to go. Where's the drama?
To be able to win that football game, to culminate a great season with a great football team, and I felt I deserved to win a national championship, and it was really special.
The only question remaining on people's minds who witnessed the performance in this game and the whole season was, where did this team rank among the best ever at the University of Miami?
That team might have been one of the best, if not the best team at the University of Miami. It's either the best or 1A, and you could make an argument that team was the best ever in college football.
The 2001 national championship, that was an outstanding team. They had a great offensive line, they had a great quarterback, wide receiver talent, defensive talent. That's probably the best Miami team that ever played.
No doubt this UM squad was one of the best in school history as Miami closed out the season with a blowout victory and the national championship. Final score, Miami 37, Nebraska 14. A game to remember, a season to remember, January 3rd, 2002.
Early in this decade, Miami and Florida renewed their rivalry for the first time in 15 years. The Canes grabbed up a victory in 2002 up in Gainesville. So in the 03 season, the Gators came down to the Orange Bowl hungry for a victory against their in-state rivals, the Miami Hurricanes.
September 6, 2003, Miami versus Florida. Just 1 year earlier, the Hurricanes had marched into Gainesville and torched the Gators 41-16.
Actually, Ron Zook had said the previous year was his first game coaching against Miami in Gainesville, and the Hurricanes come out of the tunnel. And Ron Zook said to his assistants, one day we're going to look like those guys.
All signs pointed to a repeat performance following Devin Hester's 97-yard touchdown return on the opening kickoff.
He's got some help from Leon Williams. Devin Hester to the 20, cutting back again, and Devin Hester will house it on the opening kickoff.
I think that's kind of one thing he told me. He says, Coach, I'll return the kickoff for a touchdown. I said, well, good, Devin. And he does. A great talent and really gave us a great start for the football game.
Basically, the kickoff, it was so much built inside of me for the year that I was set out, and I just couldn't wait to play in the OB. And once I got a chance, I wanted to be remembered as the first time touching the ball in the OB. It's going to be what happened.
And Devin Hester returns the opening kickoff. And again, the Orange Bowl is going crazy, and you think, this is going to be easy.
And he predicted it. He told everybody and their brother, I'm bringing one back. And sure enough, he did. And right there, you almost think that kind of let Miami relax a little bit because it was just too easy.
This game would be anything but easy for the Canes. They would score just 3 points the rest of the first half. The Gators, meanwhile, took control and took a 19-10 halftime lead.
They had shown no signs of, one, stopping Florida, and secondly, they weren't showing really any signs of solving Florida's defense. They were making all the plays. The Gators were sacking Brock Berlin, smacking him in the mouth. They're picking up the loose ball, returning fumbles and interceptions for touchdowns. It was an avalanche the other way.
The second half started even worse. The Gators scored another touchdown on the first play from scrimmage, more turnovers, and another Florida score followed, and the Gators took a 33-10 lead with 6 minutes left to go in the third quarter.
And it's getting ugly for Miami.
I kept looking over, wondering, what if they're going to take Brock out of this game?
Have to wonder if we might see Derek Crudup in this game.
Well, you got to wonder because you got to do something.
And just as this one looked to be in the bag for the Gators, and Brock Berlin came alive, and a comeback was underway.
We don't ever count ourselves out of the game. We try not to worry about the scoreboard and look at the scoreboard too much. We just try to just play. And we knew at that point that every possession was key, every snap was key. We just couldn't make any mistakes, and we're very fortunate we didn't.
Okay, they're coming to life. And then the Kevin Beard pass, 64 yards, down to about the 2-yard line. Then I felt like here comes the tidal wave. I felt like, all right, we've got something special going on here. This kid is on fire, and we're going to have ourselves a historical finish.
The Gators could barely keep possession after the 6-minute mark in the third quarter. The Canes scored 3 touchdowns to pull within 33-32 at the 11-minute mark of the fourth quarter. After a Miami stop, Brock Berlin would need to take the team down the field from his own 11-yard line. He overcame severe cramps to do just that.
I think that was his revenge, or his part where he kind of proved that, look, I'm glad to be a Hurricane. I'm glad to be a part of this program. And when you see him throw those passes and what he does in that fourth quarter, even though he didn't help himself, a lot in the first half of the game, he redeemed himself in the second half.
Miami marched down the field, and instead of settling for a field goal, Frank Gore decided to end the game himself on the same leg, which kept him out the entire previous season.
I think it was the most amazing comeback I'd ever seen. Given the circumstances that it was the Gators, this comeback was, pick an adjective, breathtaking, incredible. It was just unbelievable that this was playing out in front of us.
The Canes still hadn't lost to the Gators since 1985. Final score, Miami 38, Florida 33. A game to remember, September 6, 2003.
For our final look back, we bring you to yet another in the long line of great Miami-Florida State games. 2004 marked the first time the Canes and the Noles had ever met in a season opener. It also marked the first time they had ever met as members of the same conference, the Atlantic Coast Conference. It would be in the Orange Bowl, and it was yet another classic finish in the history of perhaps the best rivalry in all of college football.
September 10th, 2004, Miami versus Florida State in the Orange Bowl.
It's just tradition. I mean, you can't lose. You can lose all your other games. You can't lose to Florida State. Regardless of what happens, you just can't lose.
Traditionally, the Miami-Florida State game had been played in the middle of the season, but for 04 and 05, the two schools had agreed to play a two-game series on Labor Day night. But Labor Day was not to be in 2004 because of Hurricane Francis.
The game was delayed until, I believe, on a Friday, and still, I think, the second highest rated college football game in the country that year. And
the 6-0 game. I mean, that's what Miami was playing for. They're playing for 6 in a row against Florida State.
Early, it was a defensive struggle until Florida State kicked a field goal and forced a turnover, which resulted in a 61-yard touchdown return and a 10-0 Seminole lead at the half.
We really had a lot of yardage. We had twice as much yardage as Florida State did in the course of the game, but we just hadn't had points. We turned the ball over, which gave them an easy touchdown, and I think the thing we just had to do was we had to make sure and make some plays, make some things happen.
Things wrong on offense. Hey, we're still right in this thing. We're still right in it. The thing people do sometimes, you won't panic. Don't panic. Let's keep punching. Stay in the process. Do the things your coaches do. Let's find a way. Let's find a way to win. Find a way to win. Let's go. Let's do it.
We were behind in the game the whole way and really didn't seem to come to life until the very end of the game.
Miami would need to mount a second-half comeback, but the Canes' third quarter wasn't much better than its first half, as they still couldn't muster any offense.
They have a 1st and goal at the 2-yard line and can't get it in.
Miami was finally sparked on the first play of the fourth quarter as Brock Berlin hooked up with Sonoris Moss for 63 yards, which set up a John Petty field goal. The Canes were on the board. The two teams punted back and forth until FSU started a drive. The Seminoles lined up for a 34-yard field goal attempt. This one, though, was neither wide right nor wide left.
Disaster in the kicking game strikes for Florida State. Devin Hester makes this incredible play coming off the corner to block the kick.
Devin Hester does really the impossible. He lines up with two wings on that side. There's an extra man on the side that Devin Hester's on. No way in the world should he block that kick, and he blocks it.
The 80% chance of losing, blocking that field goal made it more easy on us, and basically we came back and had a chance to win the game.
Miami was not winning the Florida State game without Devin Hester making that play.
Even after the block, Florida State had life intercepting Berlin's next pass. The Canes held, though, and got the ball back one last time.
Before the touchdown, Brock Berlin is on the headphones with Dan Werner upstairs. There's a timeout. There might have been an injury, but there was a timeout. So Miami used it with Brock talking to Dan Werner. And I remember saying to Don Bailey, well, the screen hasn't been there all night. Maybe they ought to put that play away. And they come back out and they run the screen to Sonoris Moss.
He catches the football and he moves down the field, and what people don't see on that play is all his linemen are just picking off Seminoles one by one.
We didn't lose faith. We just went out there and executed the best way that we can, and I made the big play.
Miami and Florida State headed to overtime for the first time in this storied rivalry.
And I remember when Miami tied it up and they had the screen, the monitor on the coin toss for overtime, I see the Florida State guys just staring at the ground, looking up at the skies, looking like, my God, I can't go another play.
After Miami forced an FSU turnover to begin overtime, all they needed was a field goal, but Frank Gore had a different idea.
I think they were getting a little tired at the time, and we were really starting to get a lot of momentum at the time, and I think when we had their defense sealed and Frank got outside and just had a nice crease in the defense and just made a great run. And
he was probably almost the least likely person to carry the ball in, but he got the job done. It was a really thrilling night.
It was so inspirational because everybody knew what Frank Gore had gone through. He had one knee injury and then he has another knee injury.
I thought the old place was going to come down. It was shaking it was so loud and it was shaking. The place was vibrating, and what a great moment for Frank Gore, who had worked so hard to get back into the lineup to win the game in overtime.
Final score, Miami 16, Florida State 10. A game to remember, September 10th, 2004.
You know, there have been so many classic games in the history of Hurricane football, one could fill volumes of books remembering all of the great moments. And with all those great games, it's impossible to pick just one which stands out. But the bottom line is this: during the fall in South Florida, there will be great football played, and certainly great and memorable games at the University of Miami. Over the past 2 decades of Miami football, there have been so many great games. And there's no reason to believe we won't see games as great and games that carry as much significance over the next 2 decades at the University of Miami. I'm Frank Forte. So long, everyone.